Shadow of the Colossus is a cult classic that many people nowadays might not even know about. It was originally released in 2005 and at the time was beloved for the experience it provided unlike anything else out there. And to this day, that experience still remains so powerful. And that's because of the world and the beauty it managed to capture at such a weird moment in time. In the game, you traverse massive and open landscapes that go on for miles and simply meander in any direction towards your goal. And along the way, you are met with titans of immense scale that can be fought by climbing their entire bodies to reach weak points and deal fatal damage. Not only is it a cool concept for a game, but also it lends itself to so many astounding set pieces where you'll find yourself feeling what feels like titans in a massive canyon. This was before games were really focused on bombastic set pieces like this. And even more impressively, Shadows of the Colossus does it in real time. But even for all the amazing fights, still to this day, the most memorable thing about the game is the world and its environments. Walking through an open field of grass and peering off into the distance to see armies of waterfalls and cliffs accompanied by ancient structures of a civilization long destroyed. There's a strange sense of calmness and coldness you get when playing this game, and because of the time period it was constructed in, it still has that eerie gray glow that was a staple of games at the time, courtesy of Gears of War. But while in most games I hate this look as it just feels washed out and bland, for some reason here in Shadow of the Colossus, it fits perfectly. It adds a sense of drabness to the world that elevates its intrigue, where otherwise it would probably come off as too childish and insubstantial. And because of that, a world that should be bland actually has so much life to it. Even at moments where you are traversing a wide open desert, and almost everything on your screen is sand with less than stellar physics reactions, it still feels like home for some reason. It's one of those game worlds that just happens to hit an odd sense of calmness that puts you at ease, and it makes every combat encounter that much more epic because of how serene the other moments in the game world are. Later into the game too, you will find many mega structures and fortresses that lay dormant yet still tell a story all to their own. And finding these scattered across such a desolate wasteland that stretches for miles once again just adds to the oddities of this world that bring it all together. And finally, at the forefront of it all is the sounds and music. Listening to the hooves of your horse clap against the ground or wind as it howls across the canyons in game. The world constantly feels like it's almost in slow motion and almost brings you into a trance that no other game in history matches. At so many points when playing this game, you will almost feel like a song should be starting to play like it would in any other title, but the developers had the restraint here to instead let the world and its beauty speak for itself, allowing you to be completely smothered by its confidence. I'm usually a fan of newer games over old, somehow finding myself in the opposite predicament of most people who love older games and their nostalgia, but Shadows of the Colossus is one of those select few that, despite how many decades old it is now, continues to prove that real art is all about the feelings and design, not the best new engine. I've always been of the belief that the best possible game world imaginable, the one with the most intrigue, the most vast and interesting spaces, and the one with the most beauty, would be one set in space. But sadly, because of how hard it is to capture this setting compared to things like traditional fantasy, it's seldom studios take the risk on it. We have things like No Man's Sky and Star Citizen, but they are either not quite everything we need or not fully done yet. Luckily for us though, we do have Starfield, which despite its many issues, is still home to some of the most breathtaking worlds out there. And that's because one of the most exciting parts of Starfield is the idea of what's out there. The planets, the cities, and the random events that can occur in the vastness of space. And while most of it falls flat, some of the environments truly are breathtaking. Landing on a massive ice ball of a moon hovering across a nearby planet and seeing the sun rise in the distance is a feeling no other game gives. And just looking out into the vastness of the planets and space alike is so moving. You can set up an outpost on a planet and just sit in a chair as the sounds of the world carry on and a nearby sun or planet hovers close by as night begins to fall. And it's moments like that that really show what a beautiful universe Starfield can really have at times. Some of the cities like New Atlantis and Neon have an impressive scale and use of colors, along with multiple different zones that highlight just how great the art design can really be. I hound Bethesda all day on things I wish they could do better, but one one thing they certainly got right in many cases is how impressive a lot of the interiors in Starfield are too. There are seemingly endless locations across multiple planets full of distinct and varied architecture and stories all to their own. And because of how open the game's format is, it makes it all that more powerful when you stumble upon something with so much care put into it. There were so many times in my playthroughs of the game where I would land on a random planet not knowing what to expect and be met with a sea of strange and interesting animal and plant life that filled my screen with colors I hadn't seen before. Seeing a mountain in the distance and knowing that you can climb it, finding a nearby river and deciding to put up an outpost because of how rare rivers are in planets, or traveling up multiple stories of a megastructure lost on a moon. And even though so much of the environments and places are procedurally generated, it still doesn't take away from how eye-catching they can be at times. After all, nature itself isn't that hard to simulate, and nature just on its own, without any touch-ups, is so stunning in its own right. Maybe the single most beautiful parts of the worlds, though, are those planets with almost nothing on them at all. Because after all, one of the most haunting yet exhilarating parts of space is just how empty it can really be. And landing on these massive balls of nothingness really puts into perspective how grand and impressive the universe really is. And that's a beautiful thing, isn't it? Looking out into a galaxy and just wondering what's out there. Wondering if there may be some higher power or unknown forces at work that have crafted the very places we stand on, or if it's nothing more than a math equation firing into infinity. The things that make Starfield so beautiful despite all of its flaws is there just aren't any other games out there that sees this kind of feeling currently, whether it be due to scale or setting, and it just shows how good space games could be and how much potential the setting really has. Worlds and universes that truly have the potential to be anything, and in many ways are the holy grail to what a game world could be like and just how beautiful they could be. It's why I get excited about things like Mass Effect Next or Star Citizen, because there's a scale and sense to space that you can't encapsulate with fantasy alone, and that astounding sense of loneliness with hope is one I personally find so fascinating. When you hear this song, what comes to your mind? Probably something like this, right? It's so rare that music and scenery of a game can come so perfectly together. But in Ori, the world on offer is so beautiful, it's not hard to see how they pulled it off. And that's because throughout Ori and the Will of the Wisps, there are countless scenes that clutter the screen with mesmerizing bursts of color and environments that come to life. Oftentimes, you will see the movement of plants in the wind as you run across environments, or the subtle sounds of the earth as you maneuver deep within its crust. And throughout it all, you're accompanied by a soundtrack full of chimes and hymns, as well as many moments where the sound seems to take a back seat as you find new and interesting places where your eyes get to tell the story instead. But whether you're in a more somber or happy zone in the game, the way in which the story is told is so captivating. Without many real words being spoken at all, Ori tells the tales of heroes and villains alike, along with many sentimental moments of brevity in between fights. And speaking of fights, some of the boss battles in this game are so unforgettable. There are moments where massive monsters will chase you at breakneck speeds as they tear through the environment. And during it all, your screen will explode into a flurry of color seldom seen in many other games. In a lot of ways, Ori feels like a response to many of the titles of the early 2000s that were so full of drab and dreary color schemes, where dark and depressing grays were the usual repertoire and blood exploding out of every enemy was commonplace. Ori isn't like that though. Every scene and location in the game breathes so much life and emotion. Even just watching someone else play the game, it's immediately obvious just how much love and care was put into the visuals here. Down to the tiniest details, even on just how your character moves and jumps, often flailing and contorting themselves in fantastical ways, or curling into a ball before casting a massive spell on enemy combatants. And even more than all that, there really is just a sense of beauty in this game that it manages to capture so perfectly. Like when you find an ability tree and watch as it comes to life on your approach with a guiding beam of light at the center of its housing, placing a key into a locked door and peering on as a spark of light beams itself onto the screen with a catchy sound effect. Seeing the water shudder with each of your character's footsteps as it refracts the light from above. There are so many people that will probably skip games like this just because they're almost 2D-like. The camera angles, the pacing, it's just not for everyone. But I think Ori in a way transcends all of that. And that's because Ori captures a sense of emotion and meaning that truly reaches beyond on the medium and perspective in which it's set. Because while there are so many other games in this genre that also reach such high highs too with their art design, for example Hollow Knight and the macabre places it manages to evoke, there truly isn't anything out there quite like Ori and the Will of the Wisps, whose main triumph isn't the story, the mystery, or even the combat, of which I love in this game by the way, but rather that it manages to evoke the hero within all of us, through nothing more than an unbelievably breathtaking world and music that sets the scene through every step. Truly, one of the most beautiful game worlds that's ever been crafted, and if you haven't already, do yourself a favor and play this on a massive HDR 4K TV at 120 FPS and thank me later. You know what the coolest part of being a Viking would have been? The adventure. Sailing the high seas, playing your favorite tunes with friends, and looking out into the world knowing it was yours to conquer. Luckily for us though, there is one world out there that gives us a taste of just that. Valheim is one of my favorite games I almost never talk about, and that's because while I did eventually grow bored of endless gathering and basic combat mechanics, the world of Valheim itself is so engrossing. Each time you start up a new game, you are placed onto a randomly generated and massive map, but each zone and section of the map follows a set of rules from the biome in which it's set in, and certain locations can only be found on the edges of the map, meaning the further you venture out, the more crazy things you'll find. There are underground caves full of monsters and loot, enormous bosses all with their own mechanics that need a team to take them down, and countless areas that would make the perfect new base to set up. Throughout it all though, the shining light is the beauty of the world, and how it inspires you to keep venturing on. From snowy peaks with howling winds, to mysterious and bone-chilling swamps that will test your team's patience and skill. Each new zone in Valheim brings with it a set of creatures, obstacles, and best of all, adventure, where you will never quite be sure what's around the next corner, and because of how free-flowing the game and its mantra are, it means that creating your own story is really that easy. Walking through a forest endlessly in one direction is sure to eventually lead to a new song and interesting place, and because of the heavy focus on survival mechanics as well, along with the ability to cut down any tree or destroy any rock, the world feels alive in a way many other survival open world games don't. You may decide to set up your camp at the heart of a forest, atop a massive mountaintop, or even by the sea itself. And within each of these homes, you have the ability to create some of the coziest and most soothing rooms imaginable that all feel like home. Mighty fireplaces where your team can gather around and tell stories, or sprawling kitchens full of ingredients and tools to create a massive feast. More than anything, the game really captures our fantasized ideas of what being a Viking explorer would have been like, and constructs a world full of so much excellence. Some of the most memorable moments are just building with friends, creating something new, or making a massive Viking warship that you can sail into the high seas towards land masses you've never seen before, all while being attacked by creatures beyond our wildest imaginations. A lot of the time, the beauty of a game's world comes from that sense of exploration they can give us, and Valheim is a perfect example of the type of exploration that can make a lasting impact. Creating a game where the best moments are just sitting in your base, listening to music, and watching a fire burn in your cozy wooden metropolis, venturing out into a world begging to be conquered, and discovering all the secrets and mysteries along the way. I've always been a sucker for artistic indie games, and while they're not everyone's cup of tea, when you find one that hits right just for you, they really are great. And for me, one of those darlings for sure has to be Inside. It's from a studio that has since been through a good amount of turmoil, but Inside still to this day reigns as one of the most beautiful game worlds out there, in its own weird little way. And that's because Inside is unapologetically itself. Every scene in the game is shrouded in deep and dark shadows, and no matter where you go, there's a sense of helplessness and strangeness to it all. You find yourself as a boy without a face, who's traveling through a world where it seems that there are sort of mind-controlled husks that are hunting you down and out to get you. But the real beauty of the game comes from the odd story it tells, and how the world unfolds itself to you so masterfully. There are so many times in Inside where almost nothing is happening, yet still the experience is so engaging because of how mysterious and strange the world really is. Oftentimes you'll be making your way through a dense forest and see a foreboding figure hiding in the distance, or you'll have to make your way through a secret underwater megastructure with multiple hints at a crazy past. And more than anything, the setting here is just so fantastic. I don't usually enjoy games that focus on a lot of darkness or lack of light, but here it fits the scenes perfectly. You'll come across strange rooms full of fantastical sci-fi elements, and the world and its almost black and white nature really adds to the immersion every time. Even basic puzzles about trying to jump to higher spots will often involve things in the world like a pig that's been taken over by a parasite, and these narrative moments only add to the intrigue and the mystery of the whole adventure. It's not even that fun of a game to play if I'm being honest, but the setting and world is just so powerful that it brings you into every moment. Sometimes the best thing a game world can do is actually restrain itself, to force you as the player to come up with ideas and plots of your own and construct a narrative to it all that makes sense to you. And because of how much of a blank slate a lot of Inside really is, it means your mind will constantly be racing while you play about what's really going on. And the art style and design completely surrender themselves to this goal. Where something like Limbo was great but lacking, Inside is the true realization of a mystery game world like this. At times it can feel like a scary children's book come to life, something akin to the Little Nightmares series, but there's also a hard to place whimsical and hopeful feeling behind it all that makes it shine more than its peers. Because while Inside can look depressing or boring at first glance, there's a story and world here that it contains that really capture a sense of imagination you have to play for yourself to understand. And more than anything else about the game, it's the world and how beautiful it is that sells the product. Empty warehouses devoid of clutter but filled to the brim with darkness, or creepy lab rooms that have a history full of business but now lie distinctly lonely. It's the kind of game world that's the perfect fit for a rainy day at home that will capture a sense of uneasiness while also putting a smile on your face. Often less is more when it comes to worlds and games, because it can ignite our imaginations to come up with stories of our own. And Inside does a fantastic job at creating a world that does just that. A lot of the times we praise worlds and games for being vibrant, energetic, or impressive in scale, but sometimes a more dreary, more intimate tone can hit just as hard. And in the case of Alan Wake 2's world, this certainly is the case. Composed of many dark grays and foreboding sounds, the world of Alan Wake 2 is one of horror and beauty alike. You'll find yourself creeping slowly through dark, water-infested marshes, or through massive tree lines alike, or even diving into the depths of the characters' minds themselves. But throughout it all, the game never ceases to look stunning. There's a fog that litters most of the environments in game and adds a sense of uneasy tension. The way the light streams in through the clouds on a foggy morning almost looks like real life at times. And some of the sections later in the game consist of environments that almost feel like they have been dreamed up inside the mind of a man on the verge of collapse. There are sections in this game moving through an almost hellish New York City, where lights will flicker on and off and the shadows of the damned will pursue you in agony. Or other moments like seeing the lights of a nearby TV screen refract off a nearby puddle as you barrel your way through hordes of enemies, or hearing the creepy sounds of an amusement park in the distance as you near it, creating a sense of immersion that only a game with the most cutting-edge tech could give. It's next-gen in all the best ways possible, and when you add in the impressive facial animations and path tracing, this game has the potential to look almost photorealistic at times. And being set in the Pacific Northwest suits this so well, because it feels like you're in the newest episode of a crime show on Netflix the entire time. Maybe the most impressive part of it all, though, is how real-world acting and scenes are intertwined into this adventure. You'll be wandering around a dark subway tunnel when suddenly a TV flickers on and you're met with actual, real-life actors playing out a role. And in other parts of the game, these types of scenes are mixed interchangeably with actual gameplay, and it creates an experience unlike anything else out there, something specific to Remedy games. And while it can get really strange and out there at times, the core of this experience is so moving and beautiful in its own way. At the end of each chapter, you are met with songs that inspire hope, dread, or uneasiness alike, and they help to add brevity to a situation that feels so dense otherwise. And throughout it all, you will constantly be thrown into new environments full of creepy characters and engagements while you try to slowly piece together what is even going on with this story and this world. And the guiding light for me on this journey was always knowing that if I just played a little longer, there would be a new zone to explore, a new secret to uncover and something beautiful to unearth. They say beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but in Alan Wake 2's case, I think it's undeniable just how much of a looker this game really is. And it's just further proof to the fact that graphics, art style, and beauty are important to the game's medium and serve a much bigger purpose than most give it credit for. The whole reason this game is able to hit as hard as it does is because it taps into the most primal sense of dread within all of us from a visual and audio perspective, and reveals that even in bouts of true horror and damnation, there's a beauty beneath it all, too. Journey isn't a game, it's art. And at the forefront of this artistic endeavor is the world. No dialogue, no deep story with twists and turns, no overarching narrative that underpins it all, but rather an endless ocean of ideas to sift through and fall in love with. You see, Journey is an extremely short indie game that was released many years ago now, but even to this day, it's the perfect example of just how powerful good art design and direction can be in any game. For almost the entire runtime of the journey, no pun intended, you will be doing nothing but walking forward, side to side, or gliding through the air, trying to either avoid detection or making your way to the next area, of which there are many. But while on paper this sounds so boring and pointless, when you actually sit down and play it yourself, the meaning behind it all comes to life. The mundaneness of basically playing a walking simulator for hours is immediately whisked away when you get to see what's on screen in front of you. Endless miles of desert with an almost romantic color filter injected into the lens, and no other guiding light than simply your eyes and where they'll take you next. It flips the concept of open worlds on their head in many ways and gives the player full control of their journey and what to do. There are no side quests, no mini maps, no map markers, just a world that gives you the faintest hints of what to do next. It's one of the simplest games out there, and yet it still manages to evoke such a strong sense of discovery despite its lack of depth, because it really is wild just how much story and emotions can come across from nothing other than splendid visuals and sounds. Journey is the perfect example of why beautiful worlds and games are so impactful and important, because this is a game that offers quite literally nothing more than just that, and yet it still sits in the pantheon of some of the most celebrated games of all time. Walking through icy tundras as a cold chill barrels its way towards you, while the sounds of violins cascade through mountain ranges nearby, is a visceral experience that relies completely on the audience's full attention and interest. And while for some people that means this game will fall very flat and is nothing more than a boring waste of time, for others, it can inspire a sense of passion and beauty through nothing more than a world worth getting lost in. It's not always about the destination. Sometimes it's about the journey.